What fantasy implications can we take away from week 1 of the preseason? We're talking about that in today's video. Give us a like and subscribe. We're 5 subscribers away from 500. Help us get there, please. Much appreciated. Preseason week 1. I know everyone talks about preseason. It doesn't mean anything. And for the most part, I think people are right, especially when it comes to players looking good. Look at the Steelers of last year. They look unstoppable in the preseason, and we know how that turned out. But I think we can learn a lot from how teams are using players and the formations they're using and who's out there at what time. So I'm going to go through each game and talk about 1 or 2 things from each game that I think we can take away for fantasy, both dynasty and redraft fantasy football. Starting off with that Patriots game against the Panthers. Nothing really to talk about too much with the Panthers, but for the Patriots, a small note here, because for dynasty maybe, but for redraft, it's not a big deal. Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, and I have their ADPs, their redraft ADPs here, so Jalen Polk is barely being drafted, but they didn't play a snap either with the starters, both Polk or Baker. They're like very far down the depth chart, actually. I think Demario Douglas was out for the Patriots, and they started with Tyquan Thornton and KJ Osborne. So these guys are pretty far down the depth chart, which is kind of typical for rookie wide receivers to kind of work their way up a little bit. But just keep that in mind. I think for redraft, you're making maybe a mistake at drafting a guy like Jalen Polk. Obviously, for dynasty, it's a different story. Don't expect much from Jalen Polk on a very bad offensive team. So not really much to talk about with that game. We'll move on to the Lions and the Giants. Unfortunate news with Tyrone Tracy. Ooh, his head's cut off there. Tyrone Tracy, who I'm a fan of, especially for dynasty redraft, maybe. Did go down with an injury. It sounded like he was out for the year. It was being carted off with an air cast type of situation. And then it comes out that he has a sprained ankle. It could be a high ankle sprain. That's going to keep him out a while. That sucks, especially for redraft. I don't think he's going to be really much to talk about at the beginning of the year. He was the clear number 2 guy. That's what I wanted to bring up here with Tyrone Tracy, is he was the clear number 2 starting over Eric Gray. So he was going to be a nice potential stash for redraft if you play in deeper leagues. But, Eric Gray's stock does go up a little bit. Just keep that in mind. But it seems to be Devin Singletary's backfield. Nothing a whole lot to talk about with the Lions, except for Craig Reynolds is the RB3, and that does come into play if Jahmyr Gibbs is going to miss some time. So Craig Reynolds could get a little bit of run there for a bit. On to the Texans and the Texans and the Steelers game. I just wanted to point out with Tank Dell that Tank Dell was the 3rd wide receiver on the depth chart. I know he scored the touchdown, and I still think he's going to be very good. However, in 2 wide receiver sets, it was Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs out there. I thought potentially it was going to be Dell and Nico Collins with Stephon Diggs coming in 3 wide receiver sets. Now, this team's going to run 60 to 70% 3 wide receiver sets, so it's not a huge deal, but it does limit Tank Dell's upside slightly. If he's not out there, if he's missing 30% of the snaps or something, that's significant. It limits his upside. Can he still be where he's being drafted as a wide receiver 29? Can he still be a top 30 wide receiver? Of course. Can he get to like that top 15? It's going to be a lot harder if you're not going to be playing on 2 wide receiver sets. Something to keep in mind for you guys. On the Steelers side of things, Pat Freiermuth, who I've been starting to get excited about because I think he could have a big year for the tight end, and he's a late round tight end that I can grab. Pat Freiermuth, man, the Steelers are just kind of weird with their rotation of tight ends, right? It's Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, the rookie of last year, the behemoth of a man, and then Mecole Pruitt, who is with Atlanta and Arthur Smith and Tennessee, I believe. So he's been with Arthur Smith for a while. Now, Freiermuth did play the most snaps. He ran the most routes, but he was never out there on 2 wide receiver sets. He was never out there. When they ran 2 wide receiver sets, Freiermuth was off. It was Washington and Pruitt. There was a couple plays there where all 3 of them were out, but and Freiermuth was out there on 1 wide receiver sets, right? So, yes, is it Is Pat Freiermuth still the guy to talk about for fantasy? Of course. But it is a little bit concerning that there's going to be a little bit more of a rotation than I think we like with guys like Washington and Miko Pruitt. We saw that last year with Kyle Pitts and Miko Pruitt and Jonnu Smith, right? They kind of use this rotation of guys. So, that's my little bit of concern with Freiermuth. I just don't know if he's going to get the volume, and he kind of needs the volume of snaps to be out there to be like that top 7 tight end. So something to keep an eye on there. Moving on to the Falcons and the Dolphins. Couple things here. This is very deep. The Ray McLeod, if you play in any kickoff return stuff or punt return stuff, Ray McLeod could not only be their main return specialist, he could be their wide receiver 3 now that Rondale Moore got hurt. So keep that in mind. I also like Casey Washington, a rookie, but he might take a little bit of time to come on. But Ray McLeod seems to be stepping in as the wide receiver 3 for the Falcons. And then on the Miami Dolphins side of things, Jalen Wright, he's kind of 5th on the depth chart. I wouldn't worry too much about that. That's kind of typical for rookies. And Achane this time last year, was 5th on the depth chart. We saw how that worked out. For the next game here, we have the Ravens and the Eagles. Only note here really is Kenneth Gainwell was clearly ahead of Will Shipley as the backup. Now, I don't think this means much, except for if you were excited about Shipley. But if something happens to Saquon Barkley, I don't think Kenneth Gainwell is just going to take over. It's going to be a combination of the two. So it's really the only note I have from this game. Not a whole lot was telling here. On the next game, the Washington Commanders, New York Jets. Austin Eckler. I think a lot of people are they're not sure what's going to happen. I'm pretty sure Eckler and Brian Robinson are back-to-back in ADP. I'm kind of in on Eckler this year, especially for PPR. I think if he becomes a little bit more of this pass specialist, which is what he thrives at, by the way. Austin Eckler last year, even though he missed some time, Austin Eckler last year missed 3 games. He still caught 50 passes, and he still averaged 8.5 yards per reception, which is kind of right around where his career has been over the last 4 years, right around that 8.5 yards per reception. So I think he's still a very talented pass catcher. I think he could catch 50, 60 balls, get 100, 120 rushes, and be relevant, be a top, a top 24, top 30 guy. I think he could be a top 24 running back this year, just with those kind of stats. We know he has a nose for the end zone. The note I want to take out for him here with the Commanders is it was basically a 50-50 split, right? Brian Robinson started off, I believe, and then it quickly went out to Austin Eckler. Yeah. They both took snaps within 5 yards of the end zone as well. I think this is going to be more of a 50-50 split than people think. And I think there's some value potentially in both these guys, but a little bit more with Eckler because he's going to catch passes. Also, Jahan Dotson for the Commanders. There's a lot of kind of telling things that came out of this game. Jahan Dotson was playing in the slot, which he only played 28% of the slot as a rookie and 40% last year. Curtis Samuel was the main slot guy. And Cliff Kingsbury's offenses love their slot players. They had when Cliff Kingsbury was the coach for the Cardinals from 2019 to 2022, their slot receivers caught the second most passes in the NFL, over 400 catches. So Diami Brown's playing out wide, Terry McLaurin. I don't know if that means Jahan Dotson's off the field in 2 wide receiver sets, but in 3 wide receiver sets, Dotson's in the slot. So if he's out there on 2 wide receiver sets and plays in the slot in 3 wide receiver sets, we could be looking at a pretty good year for Jahan Dotson. On the other side of things, for the Jets, Braylon Allen is the clear RB2. I thought there was a little bit of a battle here between Allen, Isaiah Davis, and Abanikanda. It's Braylon Allen. He's the clear Breece Hall handcuff. And if something goes down with Breece Hall goes down with an injury, Braylon Allen could be a potential kind of league winner. So he's going to move up. He's round 18. He's not even really being drafted in most redraft leagues. he should be being drafted, especially if you have Breece Hall. In the Chicago and Buffalo Bills game, Keon Coleman, just a little bit note here. We didn't really learn a whole lot, I guess, with their wide receiver room. It's a little bit more complicated because MVS, who I've been kind of talking about, is going to be a little bit more involved because he's a field stretcher. MVS is going to be a little bit more involved. I think Khalil Shakir comes out as the number one guy here. I have Keon Coleman here, but Khalil Shakir was the guy that was out there all the time, right? He was out there all the time on the outside, in the slot, things like that. Keon Coleman was also out there. Mac Hollins wasn't playing, but on both Shakir and Samuel were out there on 2 wide receiver sets. So there's a chance that those 2 guys are out there on 2 wide receiver sets. It was either Shakir or Samuel. So only one play where both of them were out there. I think that's pretty telling for Shakir as well. Like if Shakir is going to be out there on 2 wide receiver sets a lot and in the slot, he could have a good year, but it's going to be a little bit hard if they're not, playing enough. Yeah. If they're not playing enough. So Keon Coleman, I'm just a little bit worried about Mac Hollins not playing, if that's going to potentially skew things on how we view Keon Coleman. In terms of the Bears, I think a big note here is actually Gerald Everett was the starter for the Bears. It was Gerald Everett. It was not Cole Kmet. It appears to be the starter. Man, this is preseason. Take it with a grain of salt. But you got to remember that Shane Waldron was the offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams in 2017 to 2020, where he coached Gerald Everett, right? And then he went to Seattle. All 5 of those seasons that Shane Waldron was with the Rams and the Seattle, Everett was his tight end. So with the system and everything, that could be why they went out and got Gerald Everett. It kind of sucks for Kmet. It really kind of sucks for Kmet, potentially. I just want to avoid both these guys. Both these guys, I think I want to avoid, and I don't want to touch either one of these guys with the 10-foot pole. On to the next game. It's the Raiders and the Vikings. And with the Raiders and the Vikings, it's about Brock Bowers and how the Raiders were using him. They used him all over the field. He played 11 of 14 snaps before he got benched, for health reasons or to not get injured. He lined up as a traditional tight end on 6 of them, out wide twice, in the slot once, and in the backfield twice. All over the place. And usually teams don't do this in the preseason. They were showing Bowers off. Like, look at what we're going to do with our shiny new toy. I think that's exciting with Bowers. I still think he's a little bit of a reach in fantasy redraft football. But if they're going to use him like that, definitely the people that are in the Brock Bowers camp for redraft, that adds kind of a feather to their cap a little bit. So interesting news there. And then Zamir White is a 2-down back. He's going to play on first and second down. He's going to play on rundowns. He's not going to catch many passes. He's not going to play on pass catching snaps. That's Alexander Madison or Amir Abdullah or Dylan Lobb. That's one of their jobs. Zamir White, though, is going to be the 2-down back, and he's potentially going to get, let me just do the math here real quick. I think Zamir White's going to get like 17 carries a game. And if I could work I think he's going to be touching close to 300 carries if he stays healthy. I really do, which is crazy. But this is what they want to do with him. And they showed it last year. The 4 games he played last year, I think 3 of them he had over 20 touches. Man, we could be sleeping on Zamir White a little bit. Is he good? I don't know. Is he going to get potentially 300 touches? There's a really good chance. There is a really, really good chance. Jalen Naylor on the other side, he seems to be the wide receiver 3 for the Vikings. And this is kind of only importance for redraft if Jordan Addison gets suspended. And we could be talking about, Jalen Naylor as a streamer. But other than that, not a whole lot of importance for redraft. On to the next game, the Browns and the Packers. Cedric Tillman is the wide receiver 3, as we kind of expected for the Browns. Don't know if this means much for fantasy. he could be out there 90% of the time running a bunch of routes. I don't think it's going to really matter too much. So we didn't learn anything with the Packers wide receivers, guys. It's frustrating. They only played 3 snaps, and all 3 plays, it was different. All 3 plays, it was different, right? It was Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed. That's what I expect to be the 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, Watson, Doubs, and Jaden Reed. But on the second play, they had 12 personnel, and Reed came off the field, which means Doubs and Watson potentially out there on 2 wide receiver sets. And then on the third play, Dontavian Wicks replaced Watson, and Reed came back in the lineup. So I don't know. I really, really don't know. If I had to guess, it's going to be Watson and Doubs in 2 wide receiver sets, Watson, Doubs, and Reed in 3 wide receiver sets. Keep that in mind when drafting Jaden Reed. The Bengals and Buccaneers, Jalen McMillan, him and Trey Palmer are kind of battling it out for the wide receiver 3. I don't think this really matters unless we have an injury to Godwin or Evans. But I like Jalen McMillan. I think he's a good player. I like him for Dynasty. He's making plays. I expect him to win the job over Trey Palmer, who has a role, but to me is a wide receiver 4. On to the Chiefs and the Jaguars. We had Xavier Worthy. If you were worried about, rookie wide receiver not starting right away, with the Marquise Brown injury missing 4 to 6 weeks, which puts him, mid-September at the earliest potentially, Xavier Worthy could rise up because he was out there. He started the game. The Chiefs started the game with Rashee Rice, Hollywood Brown, and Worthy. I know people were worried about, Tony, Mecole Hardman. Is he even still there? Tony, Sky Moore, are they going to go with the veteran wide receiver first over Worthy and bring on Worthy slowly? Mecole Hardman? No, they're not. Those are the guys, I think. And with Marquise Brown hurt, I think it even solidifies Xavier Worthy even more. Even guys like Justin Watson and stuff like that were a potential scare to Xavier Worthy. So keep that in mind. One of the biggest things I think we potentially learned was with Christian Kirk, and it's not good news. Christian Kirk was not playing in 12 personnel. Christian Kirk was off the field when there was 2 wide receivers, and that's big because I'm a big Christian Kirk fan this year. But if they're going to take him out on 2 wide receiver sets again, they have Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis out there, which makes me a little bit more excited for a guy like Brian Thomas. But if those 2 guys are out there and Christian Kirk's only in on 3 wide receiver sets, then I think we're overdrafting Christian Kirk. I really do. I really, really do. So keep that in mind. It is preseason. We saw this last year, and the only reason why Christian Kirk kind of came on was because Zay Jones got hurt. So I'm a little bit nervous here. A little bit nervous with Christian Kirk. Something to monitor for sure. Absolutely something to monitor. The next game here we have is the 40. No. Do I have the Cowboys? Yeah, sorry. We have the 49ers and the Titans. Tony Pollard looked really good. They did kind of use these guys 50-50 split. I think at best for Tajay Spears, it's a 50-50 split. And then my only concern because I think Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard are very similar in ADP. I think they both can be good with 50% of the snaps. However, I've seen Tony Pollard do it on limited snaps with Zeke Elliott. If he gets back that explosiveness, then I'm kind of in on Pollard in round 7. I think it's a steal. Tajay Spears, I'm a little bit more concerned because I haven't seen him do it with the 50% snap share. So that's my only concern. Pollard started the game. Spears came in on the very next play. They rotated. They were just rotating, not drive to drive, plays to plays. 2-3 plays here, 2-3 plays here. A little bit concerning in my opinion for Tajay Spears. Not as much for Pollard because I think he can be a very explosive player on limited snap share usage. Next up, we have the Chargers and the Seahawks game. Hayden Hurst seems to be the favorite for the tight end rotation in terms of fantasy relevancy. Hurst and Disley were the starters, and they played the first 4 drives. Hurst played in 4 of 6 11 personnel snaps, and Disley played the other 2. So it's leaning towards Hurst is going to be out there more on one tight end sets. And, Parham got mixed in a little bit. If there's going to be someone from fantasy relevancy, it's going to be Hayden Hurst. It's going to be Hayden Hurst. So he's probably a waiver wire guy, but just something to keep in mind here. Moving on to the Cardinals and the Saints, Trey Benson did not look good. Not only did he not look good, but when he wasn't playing all three downs. They had DeMercado. They had DeMercado and Michael Carter out there, right? I think it was DeMercado. Sorry, I believe it was DeMercado. No, it was Michael Carter. I can't remember now. One of those guys. No, I'm sorry. It was Michael Carter. He took all the snaps on 3rd and 4th down. James Conner didn't play. So basically what this means is you see Trey Benson's numbers there. He's being drafted in round 9, which is a little bit higher than a handcuff should go, because I think we were expecting him to be a little bit like potentially mixed in there on 3rd down, and he could maybe potentially useful as even if without a Conner injury. I don't think that's the case. I think it's Michael Carter and DeMercado out there. I do. I really, really do. Think it's one of those guys out there. I'm just double checking. DeMercado didn't play, so it was all Michael Carter. Kind of sucks for Trey Benson. I think he should fall just a tad bit in redraft ADP. Next up, we have the Broncos and the Colts. I think we got a little bit of a clear picture. It was very similar to what they did last year. Javonte Williams started the game. He played all the snaps on the first 2 drives, except for the passing downs guy. Samaje Perine was the passing downs guy. And then on the 3rd drive, instead of Javonte, they had Jaleel McLaughlin out there. Yeah. I don't know. I really don't know. Perine was still playing on passing downs. So that kind of sucks. It's going to limit Jaleel McLaughlin a little bit. It's going to limit Javonte a little bit as well. He's going to have to be a little bit more explosive and efficient. Man, do I take Javonte here in round 8? I guess I could take a shot on it, but there's a chance we're going to be very, very disappointed. Very disappointed. But Javonte was the starter. Just keep in mind, Samaje Perine's still there. He's potentially going to catch a bunch of passes. Jaleel McLaughlin's going to be worked in as well. Audric Estime is also still there. So just keep all of that in mind here. And then for Cortland Sutton, this is more about the wide receiver room. It was Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick out there. No one should be surprised that it was Cortland Sutton to start, but Tim Patrick's a little bit surprising. And then Josh Reynolds is being worked in on 3 wide receiver sets. So Marvin Mims, he played in the first snap and then didn't play again. Lil Jordan Humphrey, Devon Vele were out there a little bit, but it seems to be Sutton, Patrick, and Reynolds. So if you were banking on Marvin Mims or Troy Franklin, you might be a little bit disappointed to start the year. In the Colts, on the Colts side of things, A.D. Mitchell was out there. He was playing in the slot with the Josh Downs injury. Little intriguing, but I don't think he was playing on the outside. It was Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman and 2 wide receiver sets, A.D. Mitchell being worked in the slot. So that concerns me a little bit in the sense of, well, what happens when Josh Downs comes back? Is A.D. Mitchell just a bench player? So I think that might be the chance. I think Alec Pierce is potentially ahead of A.D. Mitchell on the depth chart. And then last but not least, it's the Rams game. I just got to keep shouting Jordan Whittington, man. The guy looked awesome. Again, if you follow this channel, you know I've been on Jordan Whittington since after the draft. I put out multiple videos about him back in May. Check those out. He looked good. I'm excited for him to potentially, with Puka Nacua being out, he's getting some work in, potentially be the wide receiver 3 for the Rams. So that's all I have for you guys. Appreciate you watching. We'll be back looking at week 2 of the preseason. Like and subscribe. Help us get to 500. Catch you guys all in the next video.